Good morning and greetings from Philadelphia. Welcome to the 6th case study seminar of the online conference Women, Water, Climate, Tackling the Challenges. Women for Water Partnership, in conjunction with its partners NetWwater and Soroptimist International of the Southwest Pacific, has organized this series of case studies. In this webinar, we take an urban setting addressing climate-related water security and air quality challenges in Khung, Kachao, keeping Bangkok's green lung breathing. These webinars were made possible through a grant of the Stockholm Environment Institute in partnership with the government of Sweden and their Asia's Strategic Collaborative Fund. I note, this session will be recorded, and we assume that by listening in, you give permission to do so. We will start with a video, and after that, a presentation of the case study, to be followed with a discussion, and after that, a young person's presentation as well. Regarding the video that I would like to introduce to set it all in the context of what is going to happen, we start with the case study of the Khung, the bend in the river. The area is an oasis of green in the Bangkok metropole with an abundance of water, fresh, salt, and brackish. It is the last remnant of the green belt of the metropolis. Home to 40,000 residents, the 6 districts that make up Khung Bang Kachao are confronted with a series of challenges regarding water and land management. The video highlights the social collaboration partnership that was formed to create and execute sustainable economic development scenarios. Please enjoy watching this short presentation.
คุ้งบางกระเจ้าพื้นที่สีเขียวขนาดใหญ่ใกล้กรุงเทพแหล่งผลิตออกซิเจนสำคัญที่มีคุณค่าทางสิ่งแวดล้อมเศรษฐกิจการท่องเที่ยวสังคมและวัฒนธรรมเคยได้รับการยกย่องจากนิตยสาร Time Asia ให้เป็น The Best Oasis of Asia สภาพพื้นที่เป็นพื้นที่3น้ำทั้งน้ำจืดน้ำเค็มน้ำกร่อยจึงมีความอุดมสมบูรณ์ตามธรรมชาติช่วยให้ผลิตผลการเกษตรมีรสชาติโดดเด่นเป็นเอกลักษณ์ปัจจุบันการเปลี่ยนแปลงของสภาพแวดล้อมเมืองขยายน้ำเค็มรุกล้ำท่วมขังส่งผลกระทบต่อคุ้งบางกระเจ้าในหลายด้าน
คนในพื้นที่ขายที่ดินคนที่เข้ามาอยู่ก็มาถมที่ปลูกบ้านสิ่งมีชีวิตต่างๆเช่นหิ่งห้อยพวกปลาพวกนี้มันก็จะหายไป
เรื่องน้ำเค็มเข้าแล้วไม่ออกพนังกั้นน้ำค่ะมันชำรุดพืชพันธุ์เกษตรกรรมของชาวบ้านเนี่ยตาย
ที่นี่ไม่เคยมีรถติดหลังจากมีการพัฒนามีการท่องเที่ยวคนก็เข้ามาเยอะ
คนนิยมมาเที่ยวเมื่อนิยมมาเที่ยวเนี่ยคนยิ่งมากขยะก็ยิ่งมาก
ไม่อยากให้มีรถพ่วงใหญ่ๆค่ะเข้ามาในพื้นที่นี้เนื่องจากว่าถนน2 เลนก็อันตรายค่ะ
งานพัฒนาพื้นที่คุ้งบางกระเจ้ามีความท้าทายและซับซ้อนในหลากหลายมิติจึงต้องการพลังความร่วมมือความเชี่ยวชาญเฉพาะทางจากหลายศาสตร์ดำเนินงานอย่างสอดคล้องเชื่อมโยงและบูรณาการโครงการ Our คุ้งบางกระเจ้าจึงเกิดขึ้นภายใต้การกำกับของมูลนิธิชัยพัฒนาองค์กรชั้นนำระดับประเทศทั้งภาครัฐเอกชนชุมชนภาควิชาการและประชาสังคมผสานพลังความร่วมมือในการอนุรักษ์และพัฒนาคุ้งบางกระเจ้าด้วยรูปแบบ Social Collaboration with Collective Impact โดยน้อมนำศาสตร์พระราชาเข้าใจเข้าถึงพัฒนาและปรัชญาเศรษฐกิจพอเพียงเป็นแนวทางดำเนินงานที่มุ่งเน้นความต้องการและการมีส่วนร่วมของชุมชนเป็นสำคัญภายใต้ความร่วมมือกำหนดกรอบการทำงานและเป้าหมายร่วมเพื่อสืบสานพระราชปณิธานพระบาทสมเด็จพระปรมินทรมหาภูมิพลอดุลยเดชบรมนาถบพิตรและแนวพระราชดำริสมเด็จพระเทพรัตนราชสุดาสยามบรมราชกุมารีในการอนุรักษ์และพัฒนาคุ้งบางกระเจ้าทั้งด้านเศรษฐกิจสังคมและสิ่งแวดล้อมให้เติบโตอย่างยั่งยืนและสมดุล
20 ปีข้างหน้าในมุมมองของผมเนี่ยนะครับคือตอนนี้หน่วยงานของราชการหรือว่าหน่วยงานของเอกชนต่างๆเข้ามาช่วยในตอนนี้นะครับพยุงให้กลุ่มต่างๆที่เกิดขึ้นในบางกระเจ้าเนี่ยกลับมาเป็นเหมือนเมื่อ30 ปีที่แล้วได้
อยากเห็นคุ้งเนี่ยไม่มีพลาสติกไม่มีโฟม
ก็อยากจะเห็นคุ้งบางกระเจ้าเนี่ยมีศูนย์วัฒนธรรมท้องถิ่น ที่เป็นเอกลักษณ์เฉพาะตัวนะคะ
เราก็อยากจะเห็นสถานที่ตรงนี้นะครับ เพื่อพี่น้องชาวบางกระเจ้าเนี่ยปีที่ได้เล่นกีฬากัน เราจะพัฒนาสร้างคนสร้างอนาคต
เราอยากเห็นพื้นที่ตรงเนี้ยมันสว่างไสวไปด้วยเรื่องของหิ่งห้อยจากกรุงเทพที่คุณมองมาจากตึกสูงเนี่ยคุณสามารถมองไปเห็นเกาะคุ้งบางกระเจ้าซึ่งมีแสงระยิบระยับของหิ่งห้อย
คนในคุ้งบางกระเจ้านี่มีจิตวิญญาณว่าเรารักต้นไม้เพราะต้นไม้ให้ผลให้อาชีพกับเรา
เกษตรกรอยู่ได้คนในพื้นที่อยู่ได้บางกระเจ้าสามารถเป็นแก้มลิงที่จะกักเก็บน้ำไว้ใช้ได้เพื่อการเกษตรของคนบางกระเจ้าเองอยากจะให้บางกระเจ้าคงความเป็นสีเขียวคงความเป็นสายน้ำอีก20 ปีข้างหน้าอยากให้เป็นแบบนั้น
มันเป็นการบอกว่าพื้นที่เนี้ยมันมีความอุดมสมบูรณ์
คนอยู่ร่วมกับสีเขียวรวมกับป่าได้
หัวเรือมูลนิธิชัยพัฒนาตัวขับเคลื่อนก็คือวัดในฝ่ายบริษัทเอกชนเป็นตัวเติมพลังที่จะให้ขับเคลื่อนไปถึงเป้าหมายปลายทาง
โครงการนี้จะเป็นโครงการที่ทำให้ทุกความฝันของชาวคุ้งบางกระเจ้าเป็นจริง
พวกเราพร้อมที่จะไปถึง common goals share vision ตรงนั้นด้วยกันไหมครับยกมือหน่อยได้ไหมครับเรากำลังจะสร้างประวัติศาสตร์ด้วยกันนะครับอีก10 ปี20 ปีหลังจากนี้
That was great. I would like to go next to picking up on this upbeat video, which provides a really good backdrop for the presentation that we're going to get from Dr. Ampai Harakunarak. Dr. Harakunarak is an independent consulting specializing in environmental and social safeguards, environmental policy and natural resource management, emphasizing climate change and sustainable development. She has served the United Nations, the World Food Bank, and the ASEAN Secretariat. Ampai holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from WWAP University and a master's in economics from Thammasat University, both in Thailand. In gorgeous Ithaca, she obtained a master's in natural resource management from Cornell University, and she holds a PhD in marine studies from the University of Delaware, almost next door to Philadelphia. Ampai, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christian. Is that okay now?
Yes.
Thanks. Distinguished guests and panelists, thank you for joining. My presentation today is about a very interesting and collaboration effort to secure the unique urban green area in Thailand, known as Khung Bang Kachao. Next slide, please. From a wide-angle view, this green area is surrounded by infrastructure of built environment. The natural environment is located inside a curved section of the Chao Phraya River across Bangkok metropolis. Next slide, please. The area is about 20 square kilometers, with canals and water bodies cover 1/5 of the total area. About 40,000 people reside in the area, which is controlled by 6 sub-district authorities. Women comprise half of the population in Khung Bang Kachao. Next slide, please. I think we should go back one slide. Is that correct? Yes, thank you. Biodiversity is in the area is relatively high, home to over 600 species of flora and fauna. This is due to the fact that the area consists of 3 kinds of aquatic environments: freshwater, seawater, and brackish water. Agricultural area is around 1/4 of the area. covered mainly by fruit trees and orchards. Next slide, please. Khung Bang Kachao is designated as a conserved green area, including the Sri Nakhon Khön Khan Park and Botanical Garden, which is home to hundreds of species and plants and animals, especially birds and fireflies. The area is a famous tourist attraction and a popular biking destination, often visited by Thai and foreign visitors. Next slide, please. Khung Bang Kachao is facing a number of threats. This includes the from surrounding and urbanization, land use change, reduced agricultural land and fresh water, and also the pollution from solid waste. I think we still in the same slide. Could you please hold on, please? How to do this? Okay. Yes, this one about the tourist attractions, which I already mentioned that people come here for the attractions, the good attraction. Next slide, please, about the environmental challenges. Yes, that's correct. As I mentioned earlier, the area facing a number of threats. This include the surrounding urbanization, the land use change, and also the reduced agricultural land and fresh water, and then pollution from solid waste and wastewater. Next slide, please. The management challenges include the need of the coordinated management and partnership building. This is crucial. Partnership among the local communities, the local authorities, and other relevant stakeholders, both in the area and from outside the area. This compiled from the previous experiences of the area management. Next slide, please. There are also opportunities and good practices evolving through collaborative efforts between various stakeholders and partners. These include, among others, the Our Khung Bang Kachao project, BioBliss survey, integrated area management initiative, and also the biodiversity protection and utilization project. Next slide, please. The current conservation efforts are working through the Our Khung Bang Kachao project, initiated by the Chai Patana Foundation in collaboration with local communities and partner organizations. Driven by His Majesty the late King Bhumibol Adulyadej's wisdom and profound knowledge on sustainable development and integrated water resources management, the project focuses on community needs and involvement, working through a social collaboration and teamwork approach. By combining resources and expertise, aiming to produce positive outcomes for the area and its community. Next slide, please. Specific goals are set among the project partners to improve people's livelihood, to preserve biodiversity, and to foster sustainable growth of the community. This includes, among others, water management and erosion control, waste management, youth development, income generation, as well as green development. Next slide, please. The project works through partnership organizations in a team-based environment. Next slide, please. The partnerships are built among stakeholders and partners organizations from various sectors, particularly the governments, business, and civil society. Next slide, please. The project is implemented through a clear committee structure comprising of operation, legal, and also the sectoral-based or issue-based operational teams. Next slide, please. From the first year achievements, after the first year of the implementation, key achievements are realized, which include, among other, increased green areas or space, green markets for local produce and income distribution, scenic routes launched, youth career developed, community waste managed, and local capacity strengthened for especially integrated management of water resources. Next slide, please. Other development and conservation opportunities also include biodiversity study and knowledge sharing. Youth from inside and outside the community participated in biodiversity survey or BioBliss to learn about plant and animal species in the area. Next slide, please. Through a biodiversity management project funded by the Global Environment Facility, supported by the UNDP and also the Beva of Thailand, the local governments and communities work together on livelihood development with gender responsive activities and training. Next slide, please. To conclude, sustainability of the local communities in Khung Bang Kachao has been and will be achieved through a number of ways. Collaboration among various stakeholders and partners. Strengthening local capacity for sustainable development in addressing existing and emerging threats, such as environmental and climate change, unsustainable livelihoods, improving people's livelihoods through green growth, and recently in coping with communicable disease. Next slide, please. If you live nearby the area or in Thailand, Khung Bang Kachao is a good place to visit, I confirm. I'm certain that you will enjoy the experience in the green environment, chatting with the locals with friendly smiles, and of course, Thai fruits and dishes. To find out more about the area, these are some websites you can start with. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ampai. This is a nice explanation of this ongoing project to keep the clean lung breathing. You emphasize to see and understand the Khung Bang Kachao as a commons, and you highlighted the need to include all relevant stakeholders in the management of such commons. This looks like a well-developed plan with sufficient attention to dissemination, flexibility to adapt to the threats of climate change, and the handling of water challenges, including grey water. I specifically like the areas of capacity building and community training and awareness programs, including those focused on climate change and water conservation. It's specifically addressing where the young people have to come in. What more can we learn from this project? And what can we contribute to this project of the commons that is the Khung? And what can we do to implement such projects? Let's turn to Simi Kamal. Our discussant, Simi Kamal, is the founder and chairperson of the Hisar Foundation and has 40 years of experience in the water sector, specifically focused on women's empowerment, social development, and poverty alleviation. She served for 9 years on the technical committee of the Global Water Partnership in Sweden, and she was head from 2016 to 2020 of the grants and programs section at the Pakistan Poverty Alleviation Fund. She is founder and co-chair of the Every Woman's Treaty campaign to end violence against women. She sits on the board of the International Water Management Institute in Sri Lanka, and she is involved in establishing the Punjabi Hisar Water Institute at the Net University in Pakistan. She is the recipient of several international and national awards. Simi Kamal holds a master's degree in geography from the University of Cambridge. Simi, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me well.
I can indeed.
So, Ampai, that was really interesting. You know, I know Bangkok really well. I have visited part of that area that you talk about, and it is such a prime example of what the lungs of a living city should be. So I'm going to add some examples from other parts of the world and see if I can relate them to this really a very great example. So unfortunately, when we talk about urban development, the picture that comes into the mind is concretization. And in the minds of many people, development therefore begins to mean concretization. And the degradation of the living environment in urban areas has only recently come to the forefront. Otherwise, no one talked about it. Nobody thought of, putting aside a green area and just, making high-rise buildings on that. So parks, allotments, greening of the cities. Some ancient cities have done this throughout the centuries, and they have managed to keep their balance with green areas and development. Some of the more modern cities have found it far more difficult to do that. And so if we want to really learn how a modern city, which has grown largely in the last century, how has that city managed to do? So this is a really wonderful example because it highlights so many areas. What do you do in the face of climate change? How does greening help to combat climate change? How do you focus on community? How do you focus on biodiversity? We heard from Empire about the hundreds of species of flora and fauna that now flourish. How do you build green value chains based on this? How do you focus on water management and look at the principles of integrated water resources management? Most importantly, how do you get the administrative support and the structure? Very often there is a battle between the citizens and the administration, and they very rarely get resolved. Then how do you get the corporate sector involved? And that's a very tricky thing because some of the biggest fossil fuel companies also support green development, but it is never intended to do away with the fossil fuels. So it's very difficult to make those decisions. And I like the way it has been framed: environment, economy, culture, and conservation. And the triple P, as we say, how do you get green markets, income, redistribution, some capitalist development, some profit motivation? How do we put it all together? And of course, the research and involvement of universities and young people. So now, if I want to share with you some other examples so we can compare, the question is that around this concretization of cities, it's either because of industrialization, it's because of land grabbing, because more living space has to be created, or there is citizens wokeness, as young people say now, citizens wake up, and so something comes out of it. So I'm going to share 3 examples with you: that of Lake Beva in Japan, the Gutter Bagicha in Karachi, my city, and in Cape Town, and to compare how some of them have tried to move out of this concretization. How have women been part of that? And whether they compare in some way to what is being attempted in Bangkok. So I'll start with Lake Beva, and please somebody stop me if I'm going on too much, okay? So Lake Beva is such an interesting example because, as you know, in Japan there's very little land, and so all the industrial development happened, and we got a whole conurbation from Tokyo to Kyoto and beyond. You just see industrial development. So much of the industrial effluent began to be thrown into Lake Biwa, and there was so much degradation of Lake Biwa that it was invaded by several species that turned the whole water red. And in the meat, can you imagine a red lake? And the mothers of children really woke up because their kids were getting sick and they were getting nappy rash, and this water was affecting everybody. So the women and the mothers, they started going to all the administration and nobody paid attention to them. So they started a street movement. And that movement picked up in such a way that it eventually landed up in the Supreme Court of Japan. And it took 10 years for that fight to happen until the Supreme Court passed the laws to say that all those industries that were polluting the lake had to clean it up. And then, the lake was cleaned up. And the concept of water stewardship actually comes from that experience, a term that we use so much like jargon now. And then, the river was restored. It became very pristine. I saw it in 2003 and I couldn't believe it. It was so beautiful. One could never believe how polluted it had become. And now it was pulled back from the brink of atrophying. And then you see, they said, okay, we have to, they used culture, religion, leisure, people's rights, all those arguments and all those traditions were used to, rehabilitate that lake and to use it in a very different way from what it was doing before. So this is an example of industrialization and citizens' action. Then in my own city, we had this huge green area called Gutter Bagicha. Now, gutter actually means something that takes away water. Sumit knows what it means and what a negative connotation it has. Now, that name was given because there was a recycle plant that was put up there, which, by the way, doesn't work so well anymore. So it got that name, but in actuality, it was a beautiful green area over acres and acres of land, lot of traditional indigenous flora and fauna. And then this used to serve at the lungs of the city. And then there was land grabbing, slowly. First, there were tanker mafia. Then they started building housing societies. Then, they said they had to put up shops there. And slowly, the area is now only a quarter of what it used to be. But then, there have been a local organization called Sherry, which means citizen, started movement against that. Again, there were campaigns. I was part of that campaign. We went to court. So at least that 1/4 area is now safe. We don't know how long it would be safe, but at least, that has been pulled back. But the city is huge, and that is not sufficient lungs for the city to breathe. And what we see is that wherever there is a park, slowly, you will see first there will be concrete walking tracks, then, there will be some parking area there, then they'll say a few shops, then they'll say a mosque or two, and before you know it, only a very tiny part of that green area is left green. So, we really need to learn for what Bangkok did. I mean, there are some differences because Bangkok has a lot of rain and a lot of very natural green areas, whereas a lot of mega cities in the world, especially in the developing world, don't have much water, don't have much rain. And, it would be much harder to do that. Nonetheless, it's an example to really learn from. And last but not least, I want to talk about Cape Town, because Cape Town is a quintessential example of what climate change was doing to it. It is a dry area. And, day zero was upon them last year. And they said on that day, water is going to run out. And the citizens all banded together. And, while there were laws, there was massive citizens' action, voluntary action to limit the use of water. So they have managed to push day zero away. They keep pushing it away, and it hasn't yet come. So I wanted to share these 3 examples with a view of what really we could do in the world. Do I have 2 or 3 more minutes left, Christian? You are muted. Sorry, you'll have to turn on your mic.
No.
Sorry?
I actually did not keep time. I have
Okay. I have kept rough time, so I think I can go for just 2 or 3 more minutes. So what I'd like to say is that if you want to draw lessons from all these examples, and we are talking about women, the role of women in the water sector, and how we can do to limit, I shouldn't say limit, how do we respond to the challenges of climate change? And climate change, as we know, is happening a lot faster than we had envisaged. We are already at 1.5 degrees centigrade temperature rise, whereas we had originally thought that this would happen by the end of the century. So given these in mind, what are some of the good practices we've seen globally? You know, cities which have given urban allotments, and some of them have done it for not a short period but for centuries. Okay, cities like London, which have this tradition of having both green areas, a lot of planting, and also allotments within urban areas where people grow food, and that's very, very important. And that is where it has worked. Good laws, different parts of society coming together, a greater understanding of the role of women, young people, and citizens. I think where that has happened and where these groups have come together, we have seen changes happening. I think one of the things we need to do, and this has come through in the Bangkok example so well, every city has to learn to grow food. We can't just rely on hinterland somewhere else. And growing food everywhere means growing them on high-rise buildings, growing them on your balconies, growing them inside your rooms, growing them on your rooftops, and that involves green thinking and the greening of buildings. So I think what we can learn, and perhaps maybe a name if you want to give to Bangkok, about the queen of greening or whatever you want to call it. But I have seen Bangkok over the last 30 years, and I have seen its greening. So Ampai, that's really wonderful to hear from you. I hope that all the current demonstrations that are going on are not going to destroy the green areas. Thank you so much.
Thank you indeed, Simi. I am totally agreeing with you about the urban food environment, and I'm very much working on it right here in Philadelphia. Also, that whole notion of Cape Town and trying to get the community together to become safe and very important. It's a thought-provoking question that you brought up indeed. Please, to the audience, make sure that you can put your questions in the Q&A box. And we will have time to discuss your questions at the end. I would like to follow up on Simi's enthusiasm and discussion points with introducing Dr. Sumit Vej, who is originally from India, but he has now been living in the Netherlands, where he is actually learning Dutch, a difficult language. He is a postdoctoral researcher at the Faculty of the Sciences at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, and also at the Public Administration and Policy Group at the University of Wageningen, close by to the village where I was growing up. Sumit, please start your comments.
Thanks, Christian, for the introduction. And I also want to thank Ampai and Simi for giving an overarching narrative of what Khung, Kachao, and other places in the world are trying to tackle the issues of water and climate change. What I'm going to do is, I just have one slide to mention and maybe 5 or 6 points to give an overarching overview of what some of the aspects we could do in the near future, what kind of research initiatives we would want to bring on, and also some of the initiatives in terms of how youth can be integrated in the tackling of these challenges or the future challenges. Please, next slide. Can we go to the next slide, please? Nope. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Susie. All right, so first I'm going to start with that. I think it's very interesting on how Ampai's presentation and her experience with the Khung Kachao gives an overarching narrative of how cities can mitigate the challenges of climate change, water scarcity, and creating these wonderful, beautiful green spaces, which Simi very well kind of discussed with other cases too. The second important thing is that I think there is a very interesting point which Ampai was making, was that the role of the youth there, and especially their involvement in some very interesting initiative like BioBlitz initiative of conserving the biodiversity there, but also kind of looking at the importance of different types of water resources. When we talk about cities, I think wastewater is a bigger issue. And sometimes we are driven in terms of this whole creating these modern mega cities that we need to clean the wastewater, and we don't see the value of what it brings in terms of nature or natural values to it. I think the importance of 3 types of water existing in that green area itself presents the overarching usability of water, but also what it brings back to the nature, what it brings back to the people. I think that's a very interesting point being made there. And I think youth can play a big role in changing that narrative. I have myself involved in various wastewater projects in South Asia. And I see that there is so much of value attached in terms of either treatment of wastewater. We should not even call it a wastewater because it's not waste. It has some usage attached to it. It can help in growing the food for the urban areas rather than taking away the resources from the hinterlands, as Simi mentioned, or the peri-urban areas where we are continuously engulfing their resources as the city is expanding. The next point which I really wanted to make is one of the, not a criticism, but a way forward to what the cities have been doing, or the example of Khung Kachao can really look into it. Especially that it has a philosophy which talks about the sustainable development as well as the integrated water management. But I still feel that there is a big gap, or that can be really looked into, is how do we bring the missing links of climate change adaptation in SDGs? We have been talking about these various international efforts since 2015, especially the SDG goals and the targets, as well as the Paris Agreement. I think somehow these 2 large international efforts needs to come together. They have been working in silos, because what happens is that if there are different ministries, there are different people, different interests, and some goes for development-oriented growth. However, there are others who are into climate activism, and they have agendas around making cities climate smart or climate resilient. And I think that is a big gap between the 2 international efforts which can be looked into. I think this project in Khung Kachao has brilliant partnerships. I think they can use those partnerships, bring the youth together, and develop these realistic plans to integrate climate change targets with SDG targets. And that could really help in reducing these gaps between synergies and trade-offs. If you go for high growth, high development oriented goals, then there's a chance that your emissions would go up. I think those kind of discussions needs to happen to have a very inclusive understanding. And I think youth, because they are futuristic, they are for the future. I think that can be a very interesting point of discussion where they can be involved and they can look into the future. Moving ahead on the same point, I think young men and women can play a special role in bringing them. We have these wonderful, I would say, climate activists around the world. Very good example could be Greta Thunberg as a young leader who is pushing the agenda of climate change on the world map. I think within cities like Thailand and so many cities in South Asia and Southeast Asia, we have these wonderful young leaders there also. I think they need to be brought in. There needs to be one who should be raising these concerns and bringing these interlinkages between, especially SDG 5, which is on gender equality and empowerment, SDG 6, which is on water, and the 13, which is on climate change. I think we need to really find a way to bring these 3 large overarching SDG goals and targets together. So that's one very important point I would like to make. Another point is that we need also research to understand these missing interlinkages between SDG targets, and also to break down these silos. Like I mentioned, different ministries have different agendas. especially when we are bringing these collaborations, which are so crucial for these kind of projects. I think we need first to get an understanding how to come up with strategies, positive strategies, to break down these siloed thinking in science as well as in bureaucracy. And it is very much possible. We have these brilliant examples which Simi talked about. I was fortunately or unfortunately in Cape Town when the 0 day was declared, or not so declared, but was supposed to come through. And I could see there were so many initiatives already going from the government, from the mayor of Cape Town, as well as from the people. So it's a joint effort. We cannot always blame the politicians for doing the wrong things or the right things. I think it's always a joint effort. And that's the beauty of collaborations, which Ampai also showed in her presentation. But I think there is a need for more political understanding or politicized understanding of these things, which is required to break down these silos, come together to develop these partnerships. And the last point I would like to make, and then I'll stop with my comments, is the role of women professionals and youth involvement to bring this paradigm shift. I think especially women in South Asia or Southeast Asia or anywhere in the world, we have to accept that they have a different way of looking at things. Giving a simple example, when men migrate, women are responsible to take care of the children, the parents, and the other relatives. They have far more futuristic looking. And I think those emotions, those aspects of thinking needs to be brought in when we are talking about these environmental challenges, because these are not challenges for today, these are challenges for the future. I think women have a very special role when we are talking about future planning, future policies, and they can help, they can devise, or they can bring their element of understanding of the nature, especially from ecofeminism perspectives and all those things. And it can help develop these plans in a much more, not just holistic, but also in a more proactive ways. I think that shift, that paradigm shift, is still needed in South Asia, in Southeast Asian countries. We always talk about the participation elements of it. I'm not going to go about ranting about that, but I think what my simple idea is that we need to bring more youth and young women ideas to bring this paradigm shift in long-term planning processes, which are part of these initiatives. I'm going to stop with this. These were my key reflections. Thanks, Christian.
Myself. There you go. Thank you very much. Indeed, the whole idea of a paradigm shift is something that is upon us, and actually the Sustainable Development Goals by themselves creates a global paradigm shift for almost the whole political world. It's a whole new way of thinking that we're doing, and what you're now attending to is very much needed as well. I would like to start asking a few questions, and I am wanting to ask two questions specifically, and one is specifically, can you, Ampai, elaborate a little bit on the BioBlitz initiative? To a question that comes from Saraja Narayan.
Okay, thank you for the question, Christian and Sarada. Actually, the BioBlitz is a global activities, as you may know. The term is like to study the biodiversity in a specific area in a specific time. And this activity was conducted in support of the Green Global Foundation of Thailand. Yes, that's the name, Muniti Lok Si Khieu, which sort of encouraged the youth to learn about the biodiversity in specific area. And in this case, they chose Khung Bang Kachao as the site. And they invited young people, students from inside and outside the areas together to learn about the methodology, how to survey the biodiversity, the flora and fauna species, and give them the kind of handbooks so that they can identify what kind of these species are and what's their lives, how they live together in an ecosystem. That's the BioBliss, and that's what's going on in Khung Bang Kachao. Thank you.
Okay. Is it definitely a professional activity connected to reach out to the young people and creating that into an action plan? And actually, I call it experiential learning and it works very well, I would say. I have another question from that had been brought to me is that let me have to come back up a little bit and allow me to be a little bit clumsy in these things. The question was brought up, wastewater is still a very large issue in many urban areas. And most of the wastewater is still going into the ground and into the surface areas untreated. And can these urban green areas change this and make citizens aware of the challenge? And I'm specifically interested in this question because in Kolkata, we have the water situation, wastewater being drained into a situation where the lakes will take care of it, the wetlands of Kolkata, before it gets into the surface areas and into the rivers. And the wetlands scenarios can be integrated with green scenarios. So this particular question is quite relevant, and I think that we should address it. Is there anybody who could address this question a little bit? How is it done, and are we going to do it in the Khung?
I can reflect on the wastewater issue, but if umpire wants to specifically talk about Khung Bang Kachao, then I think she should go first.
Umpire, you're on mute.
Okay, thanks, Sumit. Thanks, Christian. In Khung Bang Kachao, actually, as mentioned earlier, that the whole idea is initiated from His Majesty the late King Bhumibol's wisdom and also the knowledge on water management. His Majesty's knowledge is so profound, especially on water issues, ranging from the flood, the drought, the pollution in the water. Like for wastewater, His Majesty invented an equipment that can sort of add the oxygens into the water so that to sort of kill the pollution. In Khung Bang Kachao, it's true that wastewater becoming an issue because of the lots of homestays and also the tourists who stay there. There are lots of restaurants and also agriculture, also one source of the wastewater pollution as well. But as far as I concerned, if this is the main issues in the area, then the people have been attentive to that, especially in the Khung Bang Kachao, our Khung Bang Kachao project administered by the the Chai Patana Foundation and participated in by many private sectors. They, as I mentioned earlier, in our Khung Bang Kachao project, there are teams that focusing on specific issues, like, for example, in terms of the waste management, which basically one of the issues as well, if we throw like plastic or plastic waste or other waste into the canals or river, it's also pollute the water as well. In this case, there's a private company that sort of developed the Center for waste collection and then recycling, and even will be further developed to use the concept of the circular economy in the area as well. So this is one thing that Khung Bang Kachao efforts have been dealing in terms of addressing the pollution issues. Thank you.
I think it's going to be a hard one because it's so low-lying, and there is really a situation of groundwater levels being really high up already. Wastewater is going to be a major issue in how to tackle it and collect it.
Right, and if I please add, you mentioned about the mangrove and also the wetlands. That's also the case in Khung Kachao as well, because the environment is, as I mentioned earlier, three water environments, like the blackish, the seawater, and also the fresh water. So this is perfect in a sense for this species to be found, and the people also conserve this mangroves area as well. And as far as I know, there's been lots of research in terms of mangrove areas being the kind of screening area for the water pollution in a sense, because the species have the capacity to catch some of the I don't know, I mean, things, and also even the plastic waste. So it's easier for human to come in and then manage the area. Thank you.
And Sumit, you wanted to comment as well, I understand. So please do. And then I have a question for Simi after that.
I think wastewater is one of the biggest challenges when I look at the context of South Asia. I've studied both India and the Netherlands when we talk about wastewater treatment. Of course, I must say that there are technologies available. There are low-cost technologies available to treat the used water. However, the only challenge which lies is regarding the financial and governance models of these, of the setting up of these technologies, the maintenance of it, and what standards of treatment are there. When I talk about India, for that matter, I think we really lack financial models to sustain these low-cost treatment technologies. Every now and then there are piecemeal models which allows a wastewater treatment plant to be set up. There are numerous examples. I'll give you the example of Delhi for that matter. There are almost 36 wastewater treatment plants within Delhi. Only 25 are functional, fully functional, I must say. Within those 25, only 16 follow the latest guidelines of treatment of those, or treatment of wastewater. Mm-hmm. Now you can imagine if that is the situation of Delhi, what happens in much smaller towns and cities or other parts in the country. I'm not bashing about it, but I think that's the reality when we talk about it. And it's not just about the way these treatment plants doing their jobs. It's about so many other things. The boards which manage these are running in losses because they don't have a proper financial model, the proper pricing mechanisms. Which can allow them to maintain it. On the contrary, in the Netherlands, they have wonderful financial models which runs basically the water authorities or the water boards, the 21 water boards, which were 200 some years back. And it wasn't the same case in the Netherlands. In 1970s, there was a pea soup going on in all the canals, which has drastically changed in the last 30, 35 years. And they have been able to bring these technologies, use them, create these models, financial models, where they use them to upgrade their treatment plants. It's been a wonderful experience, at least in terms of my learning. And I think there is a long way ahead in developing countries where they only treat 20% or 28% of the water coming out of the houses or the sewage. I think there's a long way ahead, but I think more than anything, because we always complain about technology, I think we have the technology. I think we need to really create these governance arrangements as well as financial models to run them.
I completely concur with that idea that the technology being there, the other parts are financing, taxation, all kind of modelings to get that together. And but I want to also bring up a question that has been directed to Simi, mostly in the terms of, do you believe that it is citizen action that get green areas being developed and restored, or can it be done by just professionals and some people who look at data and say, we need to do something? Can you integrate that particular thing? And then also, how does that work with citizen action translate into gardens and balcony? Because that's where it becomes really individual. And can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Is citizen action indeed the driver?
Yes, I think it is. I think that even if government initiates programs and projects. If there is no citizens' acceptance, it's not going to work. And when we talk about citizens driving, I want to talk a little bit about the leadership of women, especially in the water, greening, recycling, all those areas. Now, I'll begin with one example. Just recently, there was an attempt in my city, Karachi, to take over some of the coastal islands and to give them to developers. And they said they were going to build like another Dubai or like another New York or whatnot with high-rise buildings, etc. There was a massive movement, even though the federal government had already done the deal and everything, and the ads were out and whatnot. The citizens of the city and of the surrounding areas rose up. There was a massive campaign. People were out on the streets, on social media, they were writing. There were several cases which went to the court. And in fact, the provincial government that had originally agreed or had was one of the co-parties in actually getting this development idea going, had to back off. They had to take a political position. And they had to say that no, we do not agree with this ordinance. And just 2 or 3 days ago, it appears that this may not happen. I mean, it may lead to more conflict, and the federal government may still want to do that, but citizens' action has done that. And in the past as well, there was an attempt to develop 2, 3 more islands, and citizens' action, those of fishermen and people living on the coast, and indeed the citizens of the city itself stopped them from happening. In the same way, as I was mentioning, the gutter baricha, the little bit that's been saved has been because of this. And in the forefront of the citizens' actions have been women, local women. And that's really important, because I helped set up something called Women in Water Networks in South Asia, and it's maybe 10 years ago. And women in South Asian countries, we work above the politics. We don't care about the politics of the armies and politicians. So we have a sisterhood across, and we are always talking to each other. And at the time when there was more track to dialogues, I was in India all the time. But now relations are so bad, I haven't been for the last 10 years. Nonetheless, so we developed this model of women in water networks, and we put them in the forefront, with the result that where women were in charge, things happened. Just look at how COVID has been managed. Which countries have developed better results? So we saw that. So part of my own work now in the water sector is to build the leadership of women for greening, for water management, for using, we don't like to use the word sewerage water because people get turned off. So we say reclaimed water, remediated water. There's so many different ways that you can refer to that. And women, after all, are the people who manage water at home, even on the smaller farms, unless it's big irrigation, which is what men do, and they keep women out of it. When we talk about actual water management and domestic water at home, I mean, if I don't get water in my house, I go running for it, not the guys in my family. Okay, so this is how it is. This is how it is. So given that this is happening, therefore we have to develop women's leadership. And as part of that, you mentioned the Panjwani Hisar Water Institute that we are putting up at one of our 100-year-old university. That was originally set up to produce engineers for the barrages and dams. Now we are saying it's all turned around. Now we need to produce young men and women who know how to do recycling, who know how to do remediation, who know how to do water conservation and water management. So one of the courses we are doing is to develop women's leadership in the water sector. So to answer your question, yes, and yes, that's the way to go.
I would like to emphasize that we are at the moment doing urban research as an urban design as new schools, and the women students and the women faculty are definitely in the majority in these schools. So we're seeing happenings there as well. I also want to underline a statement from one of our participants, and I'm just going to read it because I do not know how to make it into a question. Mangroves are being investigated by Wageningen University as a solution to save riverbanks and to avoid flooding. So we're back on finances. All these good initiatives need funding. And again, women organizations and women projects only get 0.505% of ODA according OECD research. How can we change that? Like the Secretary General Kachao says, give the money to women. I have no idea how to translate that into an action plan, but I do believe that if you say it is the local, the citizens' actions that make things happen, then it is indeed also therefore, if you then get the citizens involved in getting money, that it indeed be then the channel through which the women can participate and get deeper into it. I find this conversation very interesting because I am only looking at my own little thing in the universities and the students getting training, but the whole idea about getting the community involved is a whole other ballgame. I have I'm supposed to have one or two questions here. Try to find it here.
Christian, I want to make a comment on the
Go ahead.
comment you kind of shared with us. I think you know, it's very interesting that, because it's a very interesting fact which is being shared, that there's only 0.05% of the ODA funding goes to women organizations. The problem, I don't know if we call it a problem, the thing is that now we are talking about this whole gender mainstreaming and bringing gender in all the projects. So what is happening is that when we kind of go towards that idea, every project or any kind of funding which is being made now looks for a gender component within the projects. And many a times, these projects are not going to the women organizations. They are going to some general organizations who are doing a lot of different things. And maybe they are focusing on women, maybe they are not, but they have a gender component, at least in their research proposal. And that's where the funding is being channelized, and in the name of gender mainstreaming. So I think it's time we also start questioning what exactly is gender mainstreaming doing? Is it enough? Is it really making the difference on the ground? I think that's something which we really need to think about.
I'm so glad. May I say, yes?
May I just add to that in 1 minute?
Yes, please.
You see, there is a whole problematic around the way we use the term gender mainstreaming and how it is actually being used to subvert the cause of women. Okay, I always say that when there is a gender, when we talk about a gender gap, the rights and entitlements and resources of men are up there and women down here, and we have to close that gap. Now, in order to close that gap, we have to do a lot of specialized, proactive, women-based actions. Okay, we can't move away from that by saying, hey, everything is equal and gender mainstreaming means half for men and half for women. That's not the way it is. But that's the very simplistic understanding that is being promoted by a lot of organizations. I know of many organizations that say gender mainstreaming is their goal. They're led by men. All the board members are men. There are hardly any women. Okay, and if there are, they are only in terms of beneficiaries. So we have to stop thinking of women in terms of beneficiaries as being gender mainstreaming. We have to develop women champions and women leadership. And I think only then will things really change. And from what I heard from Ampe, that was my question to her. How would she define the role of women leadership in her project? And for mangrove development, yes, I think we have to do far more. Outside where I live, that is the world's 8th largest mangrove swamps outside Karachi, and they are being cut like anything. It's a real battle to keep them intact, and there's a whole replanting program that is also happening. But I think mangroves are fantastic in terms of doing what is being suggested from the University of Wageningen. And if we want funds, we have to be political, we have to know where to go, we have to know how to word it, and we have to be, that's why I'm saying the champions and leaders are needed. These funding decisions are made over golf, mostly, okay, or in meetings, and we have to be there in order to ensure we get some of it. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. My daughter plays golf. What can I say?
Great.
Right.
Great.
My whole point being, I think that with gender comes another way of thinking as well. And I understand when Ampai was talking about how the community is a commons, the whole problem is seen as a commons, and how that particular way of thinking about the problems creates a different way. if it's the family, if it's the community that makes the decision, and thinking from within that is a different way of thinking than exploiting the commons, exploiting the environment, exploiting the community. It's a different way of operating. And I think that behind this, the gender discussion is a couple of other elements of that type of deep thinking that might change the way we do things in the world, especially around things that are called the commons. And I'm very impressed with the work of the Ostrom and those folks. There's another person who meant, Saratya brought up again that Singapore is a great example of a great greening of the metropolis by making the buildings green. And that's a whole other way of approaching this notion of getting resilient cities that fit in the modern world and going forward. And we have not even touched about what we need to do regarding these peri-urban environments and informal settlements and the big parts of where the urban area is not even being discussed because we don't even know how to handle the poverty issues and things like that. So there's more than water alone that needs to be addressed. In that context, I had a question to Ampai about does the activities of the collective around the Khung, do they take into consideration some of the other sustainable development goals, such as women equity, such as the whole notion of food production that creates food security? And I wonder how that is approached.
Thank you, Christian. On women, if I may say, Thailand is a traditional but increasingly progressive society when it comes to gender roles. You can see that Thai women hold cabinet positions and seats in the legislature. We even have a prime minister as a lady. And specifically in the Khung Kachao area, women have played a very major role in terms of working in terms of conserving and managing the area together, hand in hand with male, because at the fundamental, for example, our Khung Kachao project, it says specifically that it has to be collaborative and it has to engage everyone. This means that the project does not really separate that we have to treat more ladies than male or something like that. But in practice, as far as I observe, women play a very crucial role in terms of doing things like, especially as a farmers, as a financier or something like that. So gender issues are women roles in conserving Khung Kachao has been doing well, and I believe that it will be increasingly engage. It will increasingly engage the women and also youth in the area, because that's the fundamental objective of this one fundamental objective of this project already. On the SDGs, you mentioned about the Sustainable Development Goals. Frankly speaking, I haven't found sort of the project specifically mentioned about achieving the goals or something like that. But the fact is that all these organizations and also agencies engaged in Khung Kachao have their own interest in SDGs, because Thailand is one of the countries that is is leading in terms of implementing SDG at the national level. So here we talk about the area specific, and those partners organization, I'm sure that they would bringing in some area of achieving the SDG into this area, especially Goal 3, the good health and well-being. Goal 4, quality of education. Goal 5, gender equality. Goal 6, clean water and sanitation. Goal 8, decent work and economic growth. As I mentioned earlier, that this project is for the people's livelihood. And the rest of the goal, especially from 10, reducing inequality, the 11, sustainable communities, sustainable cities and communities, 12, responsible consumption and production, 13, climate change, as Sumit mentioned, it's already here because especially for the disaster management, which not just only goal 13, but also goal 1 and 11, which is the sustainable cities and communities as well. Goal 14 about the marine life, of course, because we mentioned that Khung Bang Kachao is close to Gulf of Thailand. So this is the area. Goal 15, life of land. It's about the forest. It's about the green area. And specifically goal 17 is partnerships. Partnerships, which is the core sort of objective of our Khung Bang Kachao project. So in sum, I think that even though it's not explicitly say that our Khung Bang Kachao project would support or achieve the SDGs, but in practice, they are moving toward that. And this is just their first or second years of implementation. There would be more to come. And I'm certain that this will, as kindly suggested by Sumit, it will be integrated in their work plans someday.
Cool.
Thank you.
All right, you went through all of them. That the whole point. Okay, I'm hearing you loud and clear. There is one particular question left, and that I would like to bring up is that, and that is more for urban areas in general, and not for this particular project. There was mentioned that how in Singapore people are using new water from recycling wastewater, and the question that I have is how far are other big cities in the world doing this kind of thing, and what are the cultural or emotional resentments against it, and how is the technology developed, and is it possible and to implement in different places? If anybody wants to address that a little bit, that would be great. Simi?
Yes, I could take that. I was just writing in the chat box about that. I know the Singapore experience really well. Many years ago, almost, I think maybe 12 years ago, I invited a group from Singapore to come to one of our water conferences in Pakistan. And they came and, they brought all kinds of solutions, the live viruses that eat up the pathogens in polluted water, the bicycle that you can sit on, and it has a system where you can put one end into polluted water like flood water, and from the other end you would get clean water, and it used manual power, and new water was introduced. They brought tins of new water and we gave it out in the conference and all of that. So yes, all of those are available. The problem is that when the government and also the corporate sector in our country has a mindset that only thinks about big projects as development, then these little things don't matter to them. Okay, they don't want to do water remediation, for example, in small lakes and in flood waters where that happens. They want to build another dam. Okay, from where they can get huge loans, and there are huge kickbacks, and they can invite foreign organizations to be their partners and all that kind of thing. And then the international corporate sector also pushes these kinds of projects because they get a major part of it. They don't get 10%, they get 90% of it. Okay, so if in that kind of mindset, it is very, very hard to go. I mean, for me, it's a no-brainer. If you have low-cost technologies available, why wouldn't we wish to use them? And in many of our countries where the population keeps growing, we don't want to go to large-scale mechanization. It doesn't make sense. You will put people of the land, and then they'll become urban rebel. You'll have another problem on your hand, as already is happening in so many of our South Asian cities. So we want to employ people. We want people to be busy. Then we need to go to those solutions. And I think Singapore has wonderful solutions that we can learn from. And of course, part of the reason they have been able to implement is, their fairly dictatorial setup that allows them, and very strict rules and regulations. It's not as democratic as other places. But then, sometimes you have to have trade-offs, and you have to see what is it that you need to do for people to be able to participate and to benefit. So I think the solutions are out there. I think when citizens get together and they make demands, then things happen. Then governments are forced to respond. If we leave it to the governments, okay, there will be more and more centralization, and there will be more and more bigger and bigger projects, because in people's minds, development is always associated with big concrete structures. As part of what we are doing in this institute is to put up a lab. It's called Water Psychology and Behavioral Sciences Lab. What is it that we have to change in the way people think about water to build many more of, the Khung Bang Kachaos? Why can't we make them in other cities? What stops us? I'll stop there.
Okay. I do not know when more or less our endpoint is. I think it's about now. I would like to tell people, please do know that while we are doing our elections here in the United States, the conference is going on in virtually on November the 2nd and the 3rd, I understand. And Marit will send out some more materials about that. I would like to thank you all. I have quite a few things that I learned from here. I am using it in my own things in Philadelphia, where we do have a green lung, and we have urban food productions, and we also do recycling of wastewater. And I like to translate what I've heard here to actions here and locally. I hope that the people have enjoyed this and take lessons from it and keep active in the years ahead with doing better water for everybody and have water equity everywhere. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye, Simi. Bye, Empire. Thanks, Christian.
Bye, Sumi. Bye, Empire.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.